this is like my family's financial future.
Yeah.
And it's all well and good for a guy in a suit to say you should double or triple your growth rate, not being in that position where everything is kind of on you and you've got, your company's paying other people's mortgages as well. This is a very personal decision about how quickly you grow, how much risk you take on, how many hours you're working and what kind of role you have in the company. We could have grown at 2 or 3x, but I would have had to make very different decisions that I wasn't prepared to make at that time.
She just sold her company. She sat in a room full of men negotiating the biggest deal of her lifetime. Wait, she sold for how much? I can't even believe she managed to get double her valuation. Let's keep this just between us.
Welcome back to another episode of The Exit Whisperer. Here I am today with Kiri Masters, and you are going to love Kiri. So Kiri started Bobsled Marketing, which is a retail marketing agency. They teach you like how to market on Amazon or any of these like retail platforms, which was a really great niche to jump into in around 2015. I mean, it was like early stages there. She grew it and sold it through the course of 2021 and 2022 to Acadia, which was another marketing agency. One of the things that is so beautiful about this interview is how honestly Kiri speaks about her experience. Even though she had a great exit and even though it was lucrative, she had a really, really hard time emotionally after the sale. And the reason I think it's so important is that I want founders to know that this happens. It's kind of like postpartum depression, right? It's like, no, if you don't know that that exists and suddenly you're so depressed while you're holding your baby, that could be really terrifying. But when you know you're not alone, you know that this exists and it can be a problem. Over 80% of business owners experience some sense of regret after selling their business, even ones that make millions of dollars. And today, Kiri's going to talk to you about the start and scale of her business, but she's going to talk about what happened after the sale. And that's what I really want you to pay attention to because she is vulnerable and real and so fantastic. Take a listen. Welcome, Kiri, to the show.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Hey, before we get started, can I just mention how I first met you? It was like, I'm going to say maybe like 10 years ago, there was some women's like networking conference in New York and you had like the worst spot of the day as the speaker, like the last spot before drinks. And you came like everyone's kind of low key and you came like bouncing out on stage, just like such a ball of energy. I was like, I love this woman. I have to follow everything that she does. And I've been following you ever since. It's been great. So this is like a full circle moment for me. I'm so glad to be talking with you.
You know what? That is the best story. And it's fun. Speaking slots, when you speak, it's so important because like you could get a good slot where everyone's paying attention, or you could have a slot where like they're like, get me out. I've heard too many people talk. And you have to adapt to the audience. And that's so meaningful to me, Kiri. I love it.
Well, you were out there talking about like social and highlight reel versus real life. And you were just so real and authentic, but also like just brought the energy. So I'm a big fan.
Oh, that's the best news. Well, I'm a big fan of you and what you did, amongst other things, but what you did with Bobsled. And so I have so many questions for you. But let's talk about the start of it all. So you did not come from a traditional background to start this agency, right? Tell me a little bit about your background and how Bobsled got started.
Yeah, so Bobsled was a retail media and marketplaces marketing agency. And I did not come from retail and I did not come from agencies. So I had no business starting a retail-focused agency. I was previously in banking. I worked at JP Morgan Chase, most recently up to that, mostly in marketing and strategy, but also my last role there was in commercial banking. So I had this short, first career out of college in banking. And I started a little e-commerce business on the side while I was living in New York. So I learned a little bit about Amazon through that small business. And as I was sort of, getting into 2014, I was sort of not so interested in continuing my career in banking. I was like, well, the e-commerce business, it's super niche. It was clearly not going to make a lot of money. I'd picked kind of a random category to sell in. But I did at that point know a little bit about Amazon. I was like, you know what? I could probably make some money consulting for brands and helping them with their Amazon sales channel. And so that's what I did. That was the birth of Bobsled back in 2015.
Yeah, I think people don't even understand how important the knowledge about, especially at that time, how to market on Amazon, how to position yourself, and not just Amazon, but in general, as these sort of platforms grew, learning how to market on each of these areas. So it sounds like you were early in that space and just fearless enough to launch and go it on your own. How did it start to grow? How did it go from just you sort of, here's what you do on Amazon, to being kind of what it ended up growing into?
The biggest thing was developing a content marketing strategy. And that is something that it takes time, right? It's not like throwing money at ads or building up partnerships or anything like that. And the reason I started there was I had no money and I had no credibility or expertise or Rolodex or anything like that. And so I found that I was learning and becoming an expert by writing about it. Even if I didn't know a ton about a topic, I could go and research it and figure it out, and then use that as a channel to educate other people and sort of boost the credibility of me and the agency. That took a long time to build that snowball to start it happening. But that's essentially the sales the sales and marketing channel of the business was our content, and that we were showing up on Google when people were searching for this query or that question, or pros and cons of this, or how does this program on Amazon work? What does this mean? Our content would show up very regularly. And so we became known as a credible and trustworthy voice in that industry.
I am fascinated by this. You wanted to learn as you go. So you're doing all this research, you're putting it together, you're answering the questions that you as an e-commerce seller would have asked yourself. Then transition that into becoming this trusted thought leader in the space, and you scale. What was that like as you started to grow? Because you ended up hiring a president and stuff, right? You grew that business. Okay. So when you have no experience and you're growing an agency, I know this because I had no experience. I grew an agency. You learn a lot along the way. What are some of the key things you really learned while you were growing the business?
Well, gosh, I mean, we've only got 30 minutes, Carrie, so I'll be as succinct as possible. I threw myself into learning how to structure a business and all the, got really into EOS, the traction book, and, the strategy and the business of running a business. That was really interesting to me. And so I really vacuumed up all of this, how to run a business, how to run an agency. I joined masterminds. I joined, business communities of people who were at my stage or a little further ahead. So I found that whole pursuit very intellectually interesting, alongside learning about the industry as well. So I think you had that curiosity about how to be a good leader and what type of managerial systems to set up. And I'll admit, I'm not the person who you want, doing the bookkeeping or running payroll. That kind of attention to detail was not my strong suit. But putting together this jigsaw puzzle of who needs to be in this seat and things like an accountability chart and things like that, those were, I think, to be successful in business, you need to be curious about what is the best way to structure things and run things, because the learning never stops.
I love that. And we have so much in common in terms of, I fell in love with learning how to grow a business and kind of submit ultimately for exit. So here's my question to you. Were you thinking about exit from the beginning. How did it start to kind of come to fruition in your mind? Talk to me through that process.
Yeah, going back to 2015 when I started the company, I'll admit, that wasn't in my mind. I was just thinking about how do I pay rent and how do I afford to go on nice vacations? It was just, it was a means to an end. And I did, imagine myself to be quite entrepreneurial. So I sort of took it a step at a time. But at a certain point, suddenly I read Traction and started to implement EOS. And then I read Built to Sell, which you're probably very familiar with. And I did start thinking about this business as something beyond just me. And that was important for two reasons. One, I didn't want to be always and forever in touch with clients and doing sales myself. I liked the part of running the company that was working on the business, not in the business. That always came, I always felt that was always something I was very interested in doing. I wanted to step away from the day to day. So eventually I'd been running the business for, I don't know, maybe it was 6-7 years. And I started to get a lot of inbound inquiries because I happened to be in a space, and we can talk about the role of luck and timing and everything as well, perhaps, but a lot of outreach started to come in. Do you want to sell Bobsled? Have you thought about this? Or it became a really hot area because retail media was growing as a platform, not even just for retail brands, but for airlines and insurance companies. And it's the fastest growing form of advertising right now. And so it started to get really hot, and a lot of large agencies realized they didn't have a super strong retail media and marketplaces practice, and they needed to acquire one. And Bobsled, because of the goodwill that we established in the ecosystem and the great brand that we had, we were sort of getting quite frequently. Actually, Julie, who was the president of Bobsled, she still gets people reaching out to her on LinkedIn asking if we would sell Bobsled. It's like, yeah, we sold 2 years ago. So anyway, yeah. So I started to get inquiries, and that did lead me to think about it and understand, this might be a good time to sell in terms of the cycle of the market. This opportunity may not be as obvious in a couple of years' time. So I started to get really serious about selling in 2021, mid-2021. And that's when I went and I hired an M&A advisor to help me actually run a formal process.
Okay, so it's 2021, and we will talk a little bit about luck and timing because, there's luck, but there's also being prepared for specific times. Like, you were very early in the space of Amazon. Like, is that luck, or is it that you came in and were just first to market? I think it's all sort of fortuitous, but you have to be prepared to capitalize.
Oh, yeah.
And 2021 was a really banner year for exits, right? Going 2021, going into 2022. So you decide to partner with an M&A advisor. Did the advisor, so I hear lots of terms on the show. You either they partner with investment banking. That's usually the very large companies. Agencies often use what they would say is a advisor or an M&A advisor. And then there's brokers. And so how did when you were picking somebody, how did you find the right person?
Yeah, so it was very important to me to work with someone who was very familiar with the agency landscape. Yeah. Agencies are, they're not very difficult businesses to understand. But what's important is knowing how those transactions work, how they're structured, what is normal versus unusual, and also having some kind of Rolodex to come to the table with as well. So the guys that I worked with, R&D advisors, they had been on the buy side for decades. So they had been acquiring agencies, working at larger agencies, acquiring smaller ones for a long time. So they understood all the ins and outs, the players, what the holding company agencies kind of do, what the independents do, what the PE firms are looking for. So that was very valuable because even though I had listened to 100 episodes of Built to Sell radio and learned as much as I could about the exit process, still having someone there at the time who understood the mechanics of how things work, and very much emotional support going through the process as well. That was very important. But that was criteria point for me, was industry experience. And then I think another thing I would think about is my deal going to be exciting for them in terms of transaction size? You don't want to be too small where they don't care enough and they're not really putting in the effort.
I say hell yes to that, because a lot of times you don't want to be the small fish in a big pond that feels like it's a name and it feels sexy and great, but like, no. I think having somebody who really wants to invest the time in your business is so important, and it's not really said enough. Okay, so you run a process. Now, if I recall, the process from start to finish was only 8 months. Is that right?
You say only 8 months.
Listen today. Now, Laura, now, let me tell you, I was relatively fast, but now more than a year a lot of times. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I know it, man, like forever. The days are long, but the total time is short.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
So tell me this 8-month journey and what happened and where you ultimately went.
I felt going in that I had a lot of things buttoned up that you're supposed to. I had, good books. Like, we were quite, relative to our size, quite sophisticated with our bookkeeping and accounts and everything. So that was good. I felt like I had the things that were important buttoned up. Mm-hmm. But there are always surprises to go through. And one thing for us was we had a fully remote team. And you'd think that with 2020, and this is the way that we'd operated since 2015. I didn't meet Julie, who became our president of the company, for 2 years, face to face. We just had a virtual relationship. And so it was it worked. And you'd think 2020 would have changed most companies' perception of remote work and how, that it can be effective and that people can work together and be happy with their jobs and ambitious and everything. But there was still, puzzling to me. That still ended up being an issue for some acquirers, which was quite interesting. That's sort of an aside. The process, I came to the table to my M&A advisor with a list of people who had contacted me, who I'd had conversations with, who I felt were interested, and they came with their own list. And we had a very tight list of, it must have only been 15 to 20 names. It wasn't a huge list. I had spoken with other M&A advisors or brokers who were like, we have a list of 2,000 PE firms. We're going to email all of them. And so you have lots of, people coming to the table. The approach that my M&A advisor took, which I think was the right move, was, we keep it tight and curated. We don't want to, splash this all around over town. And the type of buyer I was interested in selling to was not a PE firm directly. It wasn't a financial deal. The value would have come in a strategic acquirer, which was going to be another agency. And actually, quite interestingly, also some software companies were interested too, because they wanted to add a service component to their SaaS business. So that ended up being good also because we didn't waste a lot of time with tire kickers, right? It was people who I already knew the company. I knew in most aspects the leadership team or the head guy or gal, and so it was we didn't waste a lot of time with tire kickers, which was really good. So ultimately, the deal took 8 months to close, and it was it's a real emotional journey. You are opening the kimono, you are naked and exposing yourself and having people kind of judge a lot of decisions that you've made that are often like very personal decisions that you make about how quickly do you grow and what does this look like for you in terms of work-life balance and where you're spending your time. And it can be you feel very exposed. I don't know, like it is a very emotional process to go through.
I totally agree with you and experienced the same thing. Was it more you felt exposed and uncomfortable, or did it make you question yourself? Like, that's what I always think back. I think sometimes I question myself, and I shouldn't, but it's because you're in, like, there's like a light. It's almost like you're in a police headquarters and they're shining a light on you and asking all of these questions. It really, I really questioning myself. I wonder if you had that same experience.
Yeah, so, I'll tell you one comment that I heard at least 3 times from different parties was after we sent the financials across.
Yeah.
Oh, we thought you were bigger. And you know what? I wasn't offended.
Right.
Because then we looked bigger.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So on one side, it was like, oh, we did a really good job of being super professional and very public and everything. And, obviously we showed up on someone's list that if they had known our revenue ahead of time, maybe we wouldn't have shown up. And then on the other side, one comment that I got, and this was like pre-2021 when I had a casual conversation with a investment banker in the space who said, we sort of talked about the financials, and they said, you really need to like step up the growth, and then you'll be really exciting to acquire. You need to double your revenue growth. And I was like, well, that's going to come at a cost. Like, is it more important to grow or more important to be profitable? And it was like, well, you need to grow. Yeah. And as
yes, and you have to maintain your profitability. Easy.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Do that. If we could do that, why would we sell in the first place? You're selling because you need help to infuse capital into the business in the first place. Like, it to me, it seems so ludicrous when they say that. Oh, you need to be growing really quickly to be. It's like, okay.
Well,
great.
What ran through my mind when they said that was, I'm solo founder of a completely bootstrapped company. This is like my family's financial future.
Yeah.
And it's all well and good for a guy in a suit to say you should double or triple your growth rate, not being in that position where everything is kind of on you and you've got, your company's paying other people's mortgages as well. So this is a very personal decision about how quickly you grow, how much risk you take on, how many hours you're working, and what kind of role you have in the company. I think we could have grown at 2 or 3x, but I would have had to make very different decisions that I wasn't prepared to make at that time. Yeah.
Totally get that. So, okay, you end up with Acadia. Talk to me about how that deal came to be and the sort of structure of your relationship with them.
So how I got introduced to them was through a friend of a friend kind of situation. And so this is where I think it is helpful to be networking and like building relationships that are like strategic relationships over time that may not have any kind of immediate payoff, but I would never have been introduced to them if I wasn't out there connecting with people and like in a genuine way as well, not expecting anything initially. But I know on a first name, like texting basis, at least 50% of my direct competitors. And we chat and like there is a mutual respect in our space, which is really nice. That was important. So I will say that, like, don't hide away. And then when it's time to sell, like pop your head out of the hole and say, hey, this is me. Please be my friend. Yeah, it'll be so obvious. But I had built a lot of these relationships up over years and years. So that was important. And then, it just was very clear that there was a good alignment in terms of mutual interests. They needed every single person on the team. Like, there was not going to be any redundancy at all. It was, a big area of growth that they were looking to fill. And for us, like, it was a full service digital marketing agency. We had clients coming to us all the time saying, can you do our social? Can you, we need to do paid advertising on Facebook and Google, can you do that for us? And we're like, oh, we really kind of want to stick to our knitting here, but we would lose deals. And sometimes we would lose clients because they wanted everything under one roof. So from that perspective, it was a really good alignment, and then also just really jived with the co-founders of Acadia. And there was just a really good feeling right from the beginning, just a good intuitive feeling that that we were on the same page, that we thought about business in a similar way, that we had a similar attitude around people and what it was like to create a company that people wanted to really invest in their careers. So it just felt right from the beginning.
So it feels right from the beginning. You're structuring a deal. I assume that you got somewhere in the range of near whatever you thought you would have in terms of evaluation. There was no major, like financially, it's okay. You're choosing based on really, here it sounds like they met the parameters, but then you have the understanding of your culture, who you are, you get each other, there's synergies. It's great. Most agencies, and I believe this is the case with you, is you have an upfront and then you have an earnout for the rest of your career. Okay. So you're there, you sell, and now you are a part of the Acadia team, so much so that you're going to move. I think I read, did you move to the headquarters, right? You moved to be closer to the headquarters, to Atlanta?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So at the time, it was immediately post-COVID. I had moved back to Australia with my family because of COVID. When the sale went through, I moved to Atlanta with my family to be at the Acadia HQ.
And how was that transition? Now, all of a sudden, you're going from building it just struck me because you built a company that was virtual since 2015. That's unusual for agencies. And by the way, when you talked about how the virtual was a drawback, I think it's probably they didn't understand how you could be virtual for so long. Like when I sold in 21, we were virtual because of COVID. So they kind of thought we'd go back, which we never did because virtual is significantly better. And you knew that from the get-go. So you'd think someone would see it as a real advantage. But I understand what you meant there. Now you're going and you're working in a environment that is very different. How did that go for you? And how did it go to go from working for yourself to someone else?
Yeah, actually, going back to an office was fine. I was kind of looking forward to it. I got some new clothes and I was,
Totally.
And you know what? It was really good from the aspect of I was the only person from Bobsled in Atlanta. So for me to have that FaceTime with Jared, the CEO, and the co-founder Sean, and a lot of the leadership team of Acadia was in Atlanta too. So it was actually very helpful for me to have some more FaceTime and understand this is how things work. This is how people think. There is I love working remotely, but it has its drawbacks. And one of them is like really speeding up the intimacy and trust of relationships. It just happens so much faster in person.
Yeah.
So that was really good. I quite enjoyed going into the office. There wasn't any like overt requirement for me to do so on a particular schedule or anything, but I found it very beneficial. And then what was it like having a boss? Look, I sold to the right company. I had the best job on like for me. I got to continue doing all the things that I was good at, that I enjoyed doing. And Jared really respected my strengths and skills and what I brought to the table. And he let me do those things, which is exactly what you want from an acquirer, is like just to not try and shove a square peg in a round hole, right? Ultimately, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, well, I'll just speak for myself, it does feel different when you're sort of building your own thing and all the decisions fall on you for better or worse. That does change. And there were so many things I was so happy to give up responsibility for and not make those decisions and not be the one, the highest escalation point. But I did ultimately really miss building my own castle. And so, I did leave, even though I had like a really great position, and it was at a company that I really respected the leadership. I'm just an entrepreneur. I had to go and do my own thing.
I think about this a lot. I think about this a lot with acquisitions.
Yeah.
I really think you have to bet that the founder won't stay unless there's some huge significant upside and you're part of the ownership or something in a big way. I think it's really hard for founders to stay. And I think as an acquirer, you have to know that you have to go in eyes wide open on that, because it's definitely important. Okay, so how long were you there? It was 2 years?
2 years, yep.
Okay. So you're there 2 years. I assume you're working on your metrics. And was it only 2 years that you needed for your contract? Okay. So you fill out, you fulfill your contract, you do that, and then you decide, I'm moving on. So what is life like for you now? And is it hard not to, do you watch them? Do you keep tabs of what's happening with your former company? Because I'm just out now. So
no, totally.
Being what's happening over
totally
there?
Yeah.
I don't know. You tell me.
Okay, well, I'm maybe 5 weeks into not being there at all, so it's still quite new. The first couple of weeks I'm gotta be productive, gotta what am I gonna be doing next? And the advice that I got from a lot of people was, don't jump into the next thing, just give yourself time, don't go start the next company, just chill for a little bit, which is not easy for people like us, right? And for the first couple of weeks, I really kind of put myself under a lot of pressure to do something, to be productive. But I am, it's summertime now, it's June. I've got a 7-year-old. We're going traveling. I've kind of got lots of roadblocks to prevent me from jumping into the next thing. And I'm just, I'm enjoying just being and not tying my identity to any one thing right now. And that was one of the big challenges that I had after I sold. Even though I had I had a great exit, I sold to a great company, I had a great job while I was there, I felt really adrift in terms of my identity and what it meant to no longer have to do that. And would I want to ultimately walk away from this identity that I'd spent the better part of a decade very carefully building and putting a lot of myself into, and wondering, is this kind of it for that part of me that I worked really hard for? So that was very challenging. I was thinking through who am I without this business, and what am I going to do next? It has been a very challenging mental and emotional journey to go through, even though I had a great outcome, which I didn't expect. I didn't expect to get depressed, but I did. So it's interesting.
I really, really just want to take a moment to honor that you shared that with us, because 80% of business owners after selling experience some form of sadness, regret, and even depression. And so it's really, because it is so closely tied to identity. And I also want to commend you, whether it is forced from travel or not, for taking the space to just be without doing. It is one of the hardest things for an entrepreneur to do. And just to honor that moment for you, that's real, and it's really hard to do. I know for myself, it feels almost impossible to do. And so I just want to commend you on that and just say thank you for sharing, because I think, founders need to hear it and know it, that if you expect it, if you know that this is a potential, then you don't feel so alone when you feel, right?
Yes, exactly. I had a lot of judgment towards myself and a lot of guilt that I was laying on the couch and I couldn't get up.
Yeah.
What? You don't deserve to be sad. You got everything that you wanted. You have this great life.
Right.
And I judged myself for being lazy, like I had all this judgment around depression because I'd never experienced that before. And you're totally right. When I looked at the research, it's more common than not for people to have, very confronting feelings about themselves and about their situation, even if everything went great.
And so where did you go, or what helped you? First of all, I think just this interview alone will help a lot of founders. But what did you use to help you through this time?
Yeah, I started seeing a psychiatrist and going through therapy, but also medication as well. And that really, really helped. So I do recommend, if that is a situation that you're facing, to seek some help with that. And it really helped me.
I love the vulnerability with which you share. And I know you have a Substack and you have a few other things where people can follow along on your journey. Why don't you tell us a little bit about where you are with some of the stuff you're putting out in the world while you are in this process of recalibrating and figuring out what's next for you? By the way, I'd bet on you any day of the week, just so you know, whatever's next. Go ahead, tell me.
Thank you. Yes. So this, with it being said that this is like a phase of, I call it like pottering around, like picking some things up. Oh, is this interesting? Or do I want to do that? But right now I'm sharing a bit more of my journey on a Substack because I would get these questions from people about, oh, how did you grow Bobsled, or what was it like to sell? And so I want to sort of document that and put it out there. So that's a Substack that I'm writing on. I've started a podcast called Obsession, and that's a story telling the stories of people who reach the top of their game, especially in business. So it's more of a narrative, sort of, if you like biographies, you might like it. And I've also started doing a little bit of coaching for people who are interested in building their personal brand and thought leadership, because, that was a path that worked for me. It's not a fit for everybody. I think you need to have a certain type of personality and skill set to make the most of that. But for people who are looking to ramp things up, that's something I find really interesting and looking. I enjoy helping people with that. So I'm doing a little bit of coaching on the side there.
Kiri, I love your story. I can't wait to see what you do next, but I hope it doesn't come immediately. I hope you're able to take the time, do the travel, really like marinate on it, putter around, as you say, a bit, and then it'll come to you. And I can't wait to watch what's next for you.
Thank you so much, Kari.